My name is Chris Leicester, and I'm a software engineer on the continuous delivery for Puppet Enterprise team here at Puppet, or over there at Puppet. So all of us at some point in our careers have probably worked for a company where implementing modern automation or DevOps tools was just a pipe dream. Either there wasn't enough time, or management valued new features over quality, or my favorite excuse is that the applications existed for 10 years without any automation, so why should we invest in it now? I'm sure a small few of us have pushed through this and implemented a culture that values DevOps and automation, but I bet the vast majority of us have just either learned to live with it or moved on to a different company altogether. Today I want to share with you my experience with these cultural issues and the techniques that we use to overcome them. I want to share with you how we transformed our company's culture into one that valued DevOps and automation. So before working for Puppet, I worked for a small software company with roughly 20 employees. We had a super oversized team of executives and managers, about 10 developers, and a QA team of just one, which was me. As part of my job when I first started was facilitating our release process. It included test environment setup and tons of manual testing, as well as the actual application delivery itself. And this process was super painstaking. And it was a huge pain. It was awful. And as a young engineer, I knew it had to get automated, but not only for my company's efficiency, but for my own sanity. Unfortunately, every time I tried to come up with a solution for this problem, I came back to the exact same conclusion, which was there was just way too much work for one person to do, way too many tests for one person to automate, and there was just no way to do it. And the worst part about this is when I brought this to my leadership team, they basically agreed with me. They said, they said that there was way too many tasks for one person to deal with, and they had already given it some thought and just decided that it wasn't worth getting started on. So we agreed that it just wasn't possible. So unfortunately, this mindset is really common, and it almost always leads to failure. There's an American psychologist by the name of Barry Schwartz who likes to call this the paradox of choice, wherein having too many options, or in this case, too many problems to solve, will cause teams to just give up altogether. But my favorite way to explain this phenomenon actually comes from my mom, and she calls this analysis paralysis, where you spend all your time analyzing and getting ready to get ready, and you never actually get started on a problem. The problem with my old team's automation goal was not that it was too hard or too complicated, it was that we just weren't equipped to handle it on a fundamental cultural level. How exactly were we supposed to overcome this all or nothing mindset if everyone on the team agreed that it was impossible? Thankfully, around this time, we hired a new manager that actually had some industry experience. And when I brought this problem to them, they had a totally different outlook that changed my mindset completely. We didn't have a giant automation problem. We had a bunch of little tiny automation problems that had just yet to be fully understood. We didn't have to automate every single piece of our release process, but we did need to understand the entire process from front to back before we could make an educated choice on what to begin with. When you understand an entire system from front to back, you have the ability to choose what to work on first. And in turn, you're freed of this all or nothing mindset that keeps all of us from getting started in the first place. In order for you and your team to start tackling your automation goals, you've got to do away with this all or nothing mindset completely, and instead focus on breaking down your processes until you understand each and every piece of it from start to finish. When you gain an understanding of your entire system, again, you're granted the ability to choose what to work on first. So I dove in. I mapped out exactly what it took to release our application from start to finish. And rather than break down everything that I learned in that process, I want to just show you a couple key points that are going to become really relevant in this conversation. So first, we depended far more on cross-team collaboration than I had originally given credit for. In particular, we actually depended on another team to set up our environment for us. There was only one person on the other team that can do it, and they really hated it when we asked them to do it for us. And second, while there did exist while our test set did change from release to release, there existed a core test set that was exactly the same that we ran manually every single time. And finally, we had a really heavy-handed application delivery process that required that some individual, which was usually me, build the application locally and then copy it over to our production server so it could be downloaded by customers. So great. I successfully broke down my giant automation goal into a bunch of little tiny automation goals. But where exactly was I supposed to start? This question may seem like the logical next step in the context of our discussion, But for most people, or from what I've observed, people have a tendency to either start with the easiest thing or the thing that they find the most exciting or the most interesting. And I know I've definitely done that before. So where do we start? I wish I could tell you I came up with a solution to this all by myself, but thankfully for all of us, way smarter people than myself came up with an answer to this a long time ago. So before I talk to you about where my team was supposed to start, I want to talk to you about something called the theory of constraints. So the theory of constraints was originally developed in the 1980s as a manufacturing management technique whose goal was to identify the most important limiting factor or constraint that stands between an organization and their goals, and then improve that limiting factor until it's no longer the largest constraint, and repeat. Put simply, a process is only as efficient as its biggest bottleneck. So how exactly does this apply into DevOps and automation? Well, let's consider the following example. So on top here is my friend Kermit, and he and his 4 teammates make up the DevOps team at their organization. Along with all the other stuff that they've got to do, they're in charge of setting up new machines for new hires when they're hired on. The process includes account setup and system upgrades and antivirus software installation, as well as a bunch of proprietary provisioning that only Kermit is currently trained to do. The process generally goes as follows. So account setup takes about 15 minutes for a throughput of 4 machines per hour. System upgrades takes about a half an hour for a throughput of 2 machines per hour. Antivirus installation takes about 10 minutes for a throughput of 6 machines per hour. And last is Kermit's top secret provisioning, which takes about 60 minutes for a throughput of 1 machine per hour. So the process generally works fine, and Kermit and his team are able to provision new machines at the drop of a hat, generally. But Kermit's team, or company just got their Series B a few weeks back, and HR hired on 9 new people and totally forgot to tell Kermit and his team until the day before. So all of a sudden, Kermit and his team are on the hook to set up 9 machines over the next, 9 machines over the next day. Let's take a look at how that process breaks down. So we can easily see that there's a ton of wasted time due to the fact that Kermit is the only one that can do this provisioning. Due to the fact that he's the only one trained, it's going to take almost 10 minutes for them to set up 9 machines. So what if Kermit's team had considered the theory of constraints when deciding which item to automate, and, or which item to work on, or which constraint to exploit? What if Kermit had trained the rest of his teammates to either do this with him, do this provisioning with him, or automated it away altogether? As we can see, just by exploiting the largest constraint in a system, we can make the entire system more efficient. In this case, like 2.5 times more efficient. I know it's just an example, but you can see that it's more efficient. So Kermit and his team were lucky. It was pretty obvious what their biggest bottleneck was, so it was pretty clear which constraint they were supposed to exploit. But this isn't the case for most dev and DevOps teams, and it definitely wasn't the case for me and my old team. So where exactly are we supposed to start? This question, or answering this question differs greatly across industries, but for infrastructure and test automation, it almost always boils down to answering these 3 questions about each task in a system. Is it repeatable? How long does it take? And how many people are currently trained on the team to do it? If we answer these 3 questions, we can definitely figure out the biggest bottleneck in my old team's system. So here I've set up a table with each item in our release process, along with each of these items, each of these questions answered about each item. So first, is it repeatable? If something's not repeatable, it's easy. By definition, you can't automate it, so we can cross off the dynamic test set. And next is how long does it take? Generally speaking, of the items remaining, the longest running item is probably going to be our biggest bottleneck. But the last facet to consider is a little bit less cut and dry, which is how many people are currently trained how to do it. Even though a given task may not be the constraint on a system, we have to consider the fact that there's only a single person on the team that currently knows how to do it, and that person is either out or leaves the company altogether. In that moment, the entire system comes to a standstill, and that item becomes our biggest constraint. So in this case, the most time-consuming task, which is our core test set, also happens to only have a single person trained on it, so we can easily see. That's our biggest constraint. Now, interestingly, this core test set was probably the most complicated thing that we could have chosen to start with. It required that one person on the team get up and running with an entire new automation framework with absolutely no previous experience, and then spending weeks, if not months, actually doing the setup process. Had we not adhered to the theory of constraints when trying to decide where to start, there's no way that we would have chosen this test set. But we did. It took about 3 months of part-time work for one individual to get it done, but the net results were astronomical. In that first year, we had a net savings of about 6 weeks for one person, And for every year thereafter, we saved 12 weeks per year. That's insane. It's a 240-hour investment saved us 12 weeks per year forever. That's pretty awesome. And to top it off, release testing no longer took a week. It only took an hour. So we were able to deliver value into our customers' hands 1 week faster each and every release. And due to our understanding of the theory of constraints, we were able to be absolutely certain that this was the right place for us to start. Oh, is it echo? Oh, OK. OK. So we were stoked off the progress we made. Not only did we reduce the amount of mind-numbing manual testing that people were doing at our job, but we had real-life data that we could point to and say, yeah, this is actually working, and it was a great idea. So where to next? Well, we know from the theory of constraints that at any given time, a system is limited by a single constraint. But what do we do when we've already exploited the largest constraint system? Well, let's go ahead and review our definition for the theory of constraints. It says to identify the most important limiting factor that stands between an organization and their goals, or the constraint, and then improve that limiting factor until it's no longer the largest constraint, and then repeat. The theory of constraints hasn't changed at all, but our release process absolutely has since we automated the core test set. In order to move forward with our automation goals, we have to reapply this theory of constraints on top of our new process. So let's take a look at how our pieces of our new release process break down with those same 3 questions answered about it as we did before. So first, we automated the core test set. That's done. That's awesome. It's no longer our largest constraint. And again, if an item is not repeatable, you can't automate it. And finally, how long, the last 2 facets to consider are how long does it take and how many people are trained. In this case, we can easily see that the item that takes the longest amount of time has the least amount of people trained. So the test environment setup is where we're going to go. Well, this is where things can get a bit difficult. As we mentioned before, there was only one person in the entire company that could set this up, and they were on another team. So how exactly what do we do when we discover a constraint is in control by another team? We can't control how much or if the other team helps us, and we definitely can't control how quickly they help us. And I know for a fact when somebody from another team comes to me and asks for my help, my gut reaction is almost always, why can't you do this yourself? And why are you coming to me and interrupting my day when I've already got stuff to do for my own team? So unfortunately, there's no truly prescriptive solution to this problem. Again, we can't control other people. And we definitely can't control how long it takes for them to help us. So how exactly are we supposed to exploit a constraint that another team has control over? Well, instead of thinking about cross-team dependencies as a task or as a burden, we've got to recognize them for what they actually are, which is just other people on another team that we're asking for help that's trying to do their normal work. Cross-team dependencies can't be thought of as a burden, but instead as an opportunity to share knowledge between teams and build intra-team trust, and ultimately get the entire organization better at allowing teams to help each other out, because that's really what we're looking for here is a way to get help. So how exactly can we apply empathy when trying to exploit a constraint that another team has control over? Well, first things first, we can communicate need and value. And 9 times out of 10, when we're asking another team for help, it's not because we don't want to do it or we're too lazy. It's because we can't do it ourselves. And that makes that other team extremely important to us. It's crucial that we communicate that importance to the other team so they can understand the value that they bring both to us and the company as a whole. And next is work on their terms. So scheduling is one of the most difficult parts of cross-team collaboration. It's important that we make sure that we time our request to fit into their schedule. When asking for a favor from another team, we've got to listen to their concerns and adjust our expectations accordingly to make sure that we fit into their scheduling. And last, and this is probably my most favorite, is share techniques. Because by this point in your automation journey, you've probably got really good about breaking down your workflows into small, manageable pieces, and then using the theory of constraints to decide which items to work on first and then where to move on to next. But you've also probably gotten really good at a bunch of proprietary new automation and test tools or DevOps tools that no one else in the company knows how to use yet. It's important that we communicate those techniques to our coworkers so they can get started on an automation journey of their own. And eventually, they may even automate the thing that brought our 2 teams together in the first place. And then we'll never have to talk to that team ever again. So once my old team discovered that this cross-team dependency of setting up our test environment was going to be ongoing, we set up a meeting with the other team to better communicate how to set each other up for success moving forward. The first thing that we did was communicate just how much of a pain it was to wait an entire day for our test environment to get set up. And we actually found out in that conversation that it didn't take a full 8 hours. It only took 2 hours at the end of the day. They just didn't want to have any downtime for our internal customers and take down that database. So because of that, we were able to work on their terms and retime our request. So it was not an effective 8 hours for us. It was only 2 at the end of the day. And finally, we shared with them our success story from automating our core test set and shared with them the tools we used. And it actually got them excited enough to go off and start on an automation journey of their own. A couple months later, they came back to us and told us that 2 hours it took to set up your test environment, that only takes 15 minutes, and we can request it at any time during the day. Even though the test environment setup constraint was completely out of our control, we were able to reduce it down to virtually nothing, share that value with another team, and ultimately get another team excited enough to move on and spread and implement automation throughout the entire organization. So I've shared with you how my old team overcame our issues and implemented a culture that valued DevOps and automation in our organization. So let's go ahead and review that entire process from front to back. So first, you've got to do away with this all-or-nothing mindset that keeps anybody from getting started in the first place. Instead, focus on breaking down your processes into small, manageable pieces. Once it's small and manageable enough, you can understand the system as a whole, and in turn, you're granted the ability to choose what to work on first. And by following the principles of the theory of constraints, you can actually be confident that you're choosing the correct items to work on first, and the correct items to work on next with each and every iteration. And last, using empathy, you can build relationships across teams in order to foster and spread a culture of automation and continuous improvement that can be spread throughout your entire organization. So cultural shifts are extremely difficult and hard and messy and awful, but they're important for any growing competitive organization. When I started at my last company, we had no release process, no automated testing, no DevOps practices of any kind, and we had absolutely no idea how we were going to get there. But through the experience of a great mentor and the excitement of an awesome team, we were able to eventually push ourselves there. So I've shared with you just one technique for fostering a culture that is excited about DevOps and automation, but just because it worked for me and my team doesn't mean that it's going to work for you and yours. The whole point of continuous improvement is that things change, and companies restructure, and teams dissolve, and projects get destroyed and other ones fast-tracked. The whole point of continuous improvement is that things change, and we've got to be ready to change right along with them. Thank you. I've been told to ask if there's any questions. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Since Chris is super speedy going through this, we're going to challenge him with questions now. Anyone have a question? No. I have a phone call from San Mateo. Anyone?
Thank you. Oh,
right.
Question?
Oh, I'm sorry. There you go.
Hi. I really love the presentation, and I feel like it echoes with a lot of what I'm experiencing with some of my teams. But another part of the conversation that's been really important for us is feeling comfortable with the impact of automation, and where today we've got a lot of processes that have approval gates, and it's very intentional and punctual in nature. As we get into automation, and especially with infrastructure as code, that punctuality kind of goes away, and it could really be enforced at any time. And we're having a lot of conversations internally about how can we feel comfortable with the impact and the risk that's associated with it in our change management processes. What would you say to those kinds of cultural conversations and the implications?
I think for us in particular, when discussing the impact of this test suite in particular, it was interesting trying to convey that spending 3 months to work on one tiny thing that most of the rest of the company didn't seem like a big deal. But I think I have your question right. What we were able to do is just break down how much of our time savings actually existed. And by just showing that data to anybody, it just blows their mind. So if you're able to figure out any sort of data points that are just we saved money or time or delivered value to our customer a little bit, people will just bow down. It's amazing. Money and time speaks to pretty much anybody at an organization, in my experience.
So I had one quick question. One of the issues that we face at our company is that we're fairly heavily siloed in departments. And I was wondering how siloed your company was when you started the DevOps journey, and how, if it's heavily segregated between departments, how you helped overcome that.
So it wasn't quite segregated. In fact, it was almost the opposite in terms of like people didn't quite understand what their role was. And in my experience, because there were so many developers in the organization and so few anybody else, that people will almost sort of like just raise their hand and would attack anything. In terms of like silo, I think I probably work more in a silo now at Puppet, not in a negative way, just we have our structure organized better and there's way more people. I've found that when I need to spread that sort of information throughout, I've always been able to just go right above me, and we set up meetings with 2 teams or 4 teams and just have these kinds of discussions. And I know that's not a great answer to set up a meeting and talk about it, but that's worked in my experience. Did you have a question in the front here?
Anybody else? Oh, wait. Oh, a couple hands. I'll get you next.
I was just wondering if you had any suggestions for if you need to work with another team that themselves are causing a large bottleneck.
I'm sorry, what was that?
If you need to work with another team that are causing a large bottleneck for the rest of the company that is heavily resistant to automation.
Well, that's exactly what I was talking about. And I'll be honest, that whole process took like 2.5 or 3 years. Like, I'm not trying to make it sound bad. It's just like persistent effort and excitement about something and continually showing the value of it goes really far. So like in an ideal world, we could just drop someone on that team to just, overhaul it completely. But in reality, showing them how successful it can be elsewhere is important. And if it's really that big of a bottleneck, maybe you do need someone on that team that knows what they're doing to fix the bottleneck. But yeah, in my experience, showing people just how great it is and how much it's working is it's way easier to do that than to try to tell anybody to do anything, in my experience.
So in your story, you were talking about how the overwhelming amount of stuff that needed to be automated, you and the leaders of the company realized or made the decision, like, there's too much, we're not going to automate anything because we can't do all of it. And then there was another leader that came on that decided that, no, there is value in going down this journey. Do you have any insight into how that leader convinced the other leaders to make time and invest resources in automation? Because, I mean, ultimately, there needed to be some agreement at the leadership level that one person could go off and spend 3 months part-time doing this work.
So in this particular case, the new leader came on, and I worked directly below that person. And he just said, hey, you've got to get this stuff done, but I know the value of this. Let's show the rest of the organization what we can do. And we did. We basically just worked on it when it was possible, crushed the rest of the stuff we had to do, and over very small amounts of time, and started to demo it to other people. And they were like, oh, it's not that hard. We can actually make this happen. So in reality, I don't think there was any sort of agreement at the leadership level. I just think it was, again, an example of spreading throughout different, showing that your team can do something and sharing that information outside. Also not a great answer, but it worked, so. Does anybody else have any questions?
5 minutes left. Any questions? Anything you'd like to share? Your experiences?
We got one in the front.
Oh. The second I turn around.
So, thank you. Great talk.
Thank you.
In your experience, have you experienced any concern among the employees of a job loss or fear of that automation will take away their jobs? So these gates are good for a reason and job security.
You're asking if by automating certain tasks, the people are scared of losing their job. So no, and only because, so in Yvonne's talk this morning, we were talking about freeing us to do what robots can't, right? So in reality, there's a 20-year list of things that we want to automate at any any organization. So like choosing the top items, all that does is you've automated that. It's not that you no longer have job security, you just get to move on to the next thing to work on. If there are people doing jobs that like truly could be automated, I think if those people are excited to work on automating those things, that there is way more for them to do with the company than just run manual tasks. Yeah.
But you guys haven't experienced that during your implementation.
No, and that's only because we had so many other things that needed to get automated that like once we automated one task, it was like onto the giant list of increasingly less important things, but still massively long list.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
4 minutes left. Last chance. Oh, way in the back. Hold on.
Thank you. Did you experience any issues with skill gap? And what I mean by that is, of course, the team, or at least the people that are leading the automation effort, will be more on board with the tools and the knowledge of how to do the automation. Did you experience any lag from other team members or resistance from other team members because of that?
Yeah, so I mentioned at the beginning that I was a QA team of 1. That QA team grew to a team of 3 during that period of time. And we had one person that was not really interested in automation, but was very much interested in continuing to do what we had always done. And there was no shortage of work to give that person, I guess. So 2 of the 3 people were really stoked to automate stuff, and there was no shortage of like, if you want to just run these manual tests, you go for it. And they continued to do so. I guess it's plausible in that we automated 100% of the manual tests away, removing this person's job. But again, like there is no automating everything away. It's like you bite off big chunks at a time and you work on it a long time. So in our particular case, no, we always had work for that person to do.